Hello and welcome everybody virtually to our CDI Technology Summit 3. My name is Will Huber and I am the proud Chief Technology Officer of CDI, and I am super excited about all of the content that we have to deliver to you at our Technology Summit this year. So let's just jump right in. So we're going to start today by thanking our customers the way we always do and the way we always should. And there are a lot of you, right? So we talk a lot about our Tech Summit typically being our largest CDI event of the year. And this year, it happens to be the largest CDI event that we've ever put on. Just like last year, it was our largest at the time. We've grown substantially, and we have over 1,500 of you who are in attendance today, which is something that we are super proud of. The customers who are in attendance today are coming from 29 states, just about every vertical imaginable, and just about every size of company imaginable as well, from startups all the way up to the Fortune 100. We're also setting a record today in terms of the number of sponsors that we have for our event. So there's over 32 sponsors who are sponsors of the event today, and you're going to see all kinds of different participation levels from those sponsors. Okay, you're going to see on-demand content. You're going to see sponsors who are speaking. You'll see sponsors doing solo sessions. You'll see sponsors doing co-delivered sessions. You'll see sponsors participating and being represented in the keynote. It's really great to see such involvement and participation from our network of customer partners and sponsors, and we're really proud to have you here with us this year at the summit. For the first time ever, we want to extend a special thank you to ServiceNow. We have a keynote sponsor. So ServiceNow is the sponsor of our keynote session today. So thank you very much to ServiceNow, and I think it's amazing how much content that they have to represent their company in our show this year. Not just the keynote, but throughout the breakout sessions, you'll see sessions as part of the digital workflow pillar, which I'll talk about the pillars in a second and how we sort of organizing our sessions. But whether it be sessions on HR or customer service or IT operations management or IT service management, there's a tremendous amount of content that's represented from ServiceNow. They have speakers in just about all of them. So be sure to check out those sessions, and a special thank you for sponsoring our keynote today. Okay, so today's event is all about a theme of champions, right? And we're sort of playing on words a little bit here, and we're talking about the title of the keynote is how to become a digital heavyweight champion in the digital world with a strong foundation. And so you're going to see a lot of representation. We've talked a little bit about our partners, our partner champions who are going to be participating in the event today. Again, as in speaking roles, in on-demand roles, in the keynote. So we have a lot of content from our partners here today, obviously. Next to that, we have customer champions. So you're going to hear from CDI customers who are willing to come onto the virtual stage and talk about how they partner with CDI and they partner with our partners to collectively deliver them outcomes for their business as a part of their road on their own digital transformation. And lastly, you're going to hear from tons of CDI champions. Right, this is probably the one thing I am most proud of for the Tech Summit this year, is how many people we've gotten involved from all corners of CDI to participate in an active role in delivering the content to you, our customers. So you'll see heritage CDI employees, you'll see executives, you'll see employees from companies that we've acquired. Actually, from every one of the 4 companies that we've acquired in the last 12 months, you will see active participants in speaking roles as part of today's program, which is just something that I am so proud of and so fired up about. Speaking of champions, is there a bigger champion in the digital world than Michael Dell? I'm not sure. Michael Dell as an individual and through his ventures with Dell Technologies and his venture capital companies and all of Dell's subsidiaries has probably done more for the technology world and maybe just the world in general than just about anybody. You'll be hard-pressed to find somebody who's done more. So we're so excited to have Michael as our executive guest today. He'll be interviewed by a champion in his own right, our president, Rich Falcone. If you've ever seen Rich interview anybody, you'll know that Michael's in for a fun time. Rich is going to have, I'm sure, some interesting questions for him, and I'm sure it's going to be very entertaining and something that we'll all learn something from. So we're looking forward to that. That's coming up at 3 o'clock, which is our CEO Fireside Chat. So you're probably wondering what's with like the 80s video game, Mike Tyson, punch-out boxing marketing theme. And it's because Mike Tyson is going to be here with us at 4 o'clock this afternoon as our celebrity spotlight. He's our celebrity guest. The title of that session is To Go a Few Rounds with Heavyweight Champ Mike Tyson. Mike's going to talk about his life. He's going to talk about his experiences and in becoming a champion in the boxing world and how that might be applicable and how we could learn some lessons from him. So I'm looking forward to that. The man needs no introduction. Okay, so this is the thing that I am probably the most excited about, which is our content catalog for the Tech Summit this year. So here's how this is going to go. So the keynote obviously is happening right now. That's the top line in this table. But starting at 1 o'clock at the top of the hour, we're going to start our first 30-minute breakout session. So this is a new format for us to deliver content to you as part of one of these summits. And so we're going to do 4 of these 30-minute sessions. And in each one of the 30-minute sessions, you'll have up to 5 sessions to choose from. Okay, so you can pick 4 sessions throughout the day for a total of 2 hours worth of content. And we've organized the sessions in alignment with our digital foundation pillars, right? So you can see the color coding scheme on the screen here. Yellow is for hybrid cloud infrastructure, purple for DevOps, green for intelligent operations, and so on and so forth. Now, we tried really hard to not have overlap in categories that we thought might be interesting to the same type of individual, right? So if you're somebody who's interested in hybrid cloud infrastructure, we tried our best to spread those out so that we would eliminate any possible overlap. That said, if there is overlap, don't worry about it. Everything that you will see today is going to be recorded and will be available as a participant. You will be able to log back into the vFairs platform, and you will be able to watch any of this content on demand. And eventually this content will make it to all of our social channels, including our YouTube channel. So if you're interested, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook if you're a Facebook person, because we will definitely be promoting this content for weeks and months long after the event going forward. So definitely you will have opportunities to see everything at the show. And then, like I mentioned, at 3 o'clock, we have Michael Dell joining us. And at 4 o'clock, we have Mike Tyson. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the CDI pillars and the digital foundation. So if you're wondering what that is, I will give you a 2 to 3 minute sort of overview of what this means. So this is messaging that we unveiled actually at last year's Tech Summit for the first time. So it's not that old. And we have been sort of evolving and tweaking and tuning it a little bit over the course of the past year. Okay. And so we'll run through each of the categories. So the first category is something we call the hybrid cloud infrastructure, which really is representative of CDI's rich history in the data center and infrastructure consulting spaces. Okay. It started with data center consulting, with networking and with compute and with storage and data protection. And later came things like virtualization and the convergence of infrastructure, and now more recently, the hyperconvergence of infrastructure, and then cloud and containers and now functions, right? But at the end of the day, this serves as sort of the foundational computational infrastructure that we run our applications on, okay? So that represents sort of the foundation of the foundation, if you will. So the next pillar is something we call DevOps. So DevOps, you'll hear us talk about this. Sometimes we refer to it as enterprise DevOps. Sometimes we refer to it as DevSecOps more recently. And this is really about how we can apply software engineering principles to building and lifecycling and managing our infrastructure. Okay, so we talk a lot about infrastructure as code in this space. We talk a lot about continuous integration and continuous deployment pipelines in this space. We talk about process optimization in this space, API-friendly and developer-friendly infrastructure in this space. And it's really designed to help our application counterparts and our software development customers, so to speak, to be able to more effectively and more reliably and securely consume infrastructure services that they need to develop and deploy their applications. Next to this, we have something we call intelligent operations. So intelligent operations really is, if I could sum it up in the simplest form, it's that our lives as IT operations practitioners, as we modernize and as we embrace new technologies and cloud and these decentralized infrastructures and modern applications, our lives as operational practitioners are getting more complicated and more chaotic and more difficult, right? And so we have more things in more places. and it's becoming increasingly difficult in terms of looking after them and ensuring the health of them and that things are scaling and as performant as they need to be. And so the intelligent operations pillar is all about how we can apply software platforms and products and capabilities to help ease the burden of this modernization that's happening around us in the infrastructure world. Next to this, we have digital workflow. So digital workflow is all about digitizing all aspects of our customer's business, right? Whether you're looking to create customer experiences or employee experiences or IT experiences, we're doing this using these intelligent digital workflow platforms, much like ServiceNow, right? There's a big player in this digital workflow space for us to be able to deliver those experiences to our customers using these connected systems. Okay. Next to that, we have digital workspace, which is all about the endpoint, right? Whether it be the phone, the computer, the video endpoint, the collaboration system. We believe very, very much in modern workplace technology is playing a huge role in our daily lives today, and that's a big discipline for us in the digital workspace pillar. And last but not least, we believe that everything that we do needs to fundamentally be secured and automated, right? We need to secure and automate our infrastructure, our pipelines, our operations, our workflows, and our endpoints. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to sort of discuss the various different capabilities of the foundation today. So we've created this idea, this fictitious organization that we're going to refer to as CDI Swag. So CDI Swag is a company, it's a fake organization that we've made up that designs, manufactures, and sells t-shirts, okay? Now, the company is looking to deploy a new e-commerce platform to sell its hottest new product, which just so happens to be a TechSummitIII t-shirt, okay? So it's going to build this application using a microservices development pattern, and they're going to deploy and package this application using none other than Kubernetes, okay? And so what we're going to do here is we're going to tell a story of the digital transformation of the CDI Swag company in a series of demos that we'll now refer to as rounds, right? So we're going to go 5 rounds in the fight to digitally transform this business. And we're going to sort of take you through this journey, which we appreciate is not really a linear journey the way we're going to describe it in the session today. But we're trying to sort of just make this a little simple and a little bit fun at the same time. So we're going to go 5 rounds to digitally transform this company. And I want you all to stick around because there will be an opportunity for you to get this hot new product, which is the Tech Summit t-shirt. You will be able to get one of these at the end if you stick around and follow along closely. Okay, so let's get started with round 1 of the fight to digitally transform CDI Swag. So in round 1, we're going to deploy some VxRail cluster to be a management cluster for our software-defined data center. So VxRail is a hyper-converged infrastructure platform from Dell Technologies. And the way you deploy VxRail is using this wizard-driven approach, using a process that lives on a virtual appliance called the VxRail Manager. So the VxRail Manager, one of the things it does is it has a discovery service that you can see on the screen here, where once your nodes in the cluster are physically powered on and cabled to properly configured top-of-rack switches, there's an auto-configuration process that allows you to automatically discover those nodes and then therefore proceed with the process to configure them. So the VxRail Manager, once it discovers the nodes, allows us to go through this process to basically input all of the required parameters that are required to set up this cluster. So we're going to define things like the physical architecture and how this thing is cabled. We're going to define things like host naming standards and user accounts and all kinds of things like that. You can see at the bottom of the screen there's the host names that are going to be configured automatically and all the IP addresses for the VM kernel management interfaces for these ESXi hosts. And we're going to continue on the wizard and deploy or configure things like the VxRail Manager settings. We're going to configure things like vSAN IP information, vMotion networks, any guest VLANs for virtual machines that we want to run on this system. And once we've supplied all these parameters, we're going to go through what's called a validation workflow. And what this validation workflow does is it essentially makes sure that the things that we input into the wizard are acceptable for the desired outcome, right? So it's doing things like checking that there aren't IP address conflicts, that the DNS records for all the components exist, that time synchronization for the components are in acceptable parameters. And then once the validation completes, we're going to go ahead and basically apply this configuration. Now, again, all we have to do is basically bootstrap the VxRail manager system with an IP address on the management network, fill out this wizard, go through the validation checks, and then actually watch the system automatically deploy the software-defined data center. So you can see here, we're logged into the VMware vSphere or the vCenter management interface that is controlling this VxRail cluster. And on the left-hand side there, you can see we have our VxRail cluster. We have 4 nodes in the cluster. There's just 2 virtual machines on the cluster right now. It's the vCenter appliance and the VxRail Manager appliance. And when we click on this cluster, we can go to the configuration menu and we can look at a bunch of different things that are going on in the cluster. So here you can see the 4 hosts that are configured within this cluster. And we can look at other things like the vSAN configuration. And we can also look at all the VxRail information using the VxRail plugin for vCenter. We can look at the VxRail versioning information. We're running version 7.0, which is the latest version in this video. And we can also get insight into the hardware configuration through deep integrations with the API and the element managers of the hardware infrastructure and the VxRail Manager virtual appliance. This is all exposed to us through vCenter. We can look at hardware faults. We can look at configuration information and health status and performance information for the cluster as well. So here we have configured our VxRail infrastructure to be our management cluster. Now we're going to build on this in round 2, and we're going to talk about the VMware Cloud Foundation bring-up process. So VMware Cloud Foundation allows us to deploy a fully automated software-defined infrastructure stack on top of our hyper-converged infrastructure platform, in this case, VxRail. So with VMware Cloud Foundation, the way this works is we have to deploy what's called a Cloud Builder virtual appliance, which is essentially the way we can bootstrap the SDDC manager to configure our management cluster on top of VxRail, which will then allow us to provision workload clusters for our running applications. So here on the screen, you can see we're deploying the Cloud Builder appliance. We're doing things like selecting the right management port groups, and we're selecting the right data stores to deploy this thing. And when we get to this part of the wizard, we're going to put in all the normal configuration information like IP addresses, netmasks, gateways, NTP information, DNS resolvers, our hostname configuration. And you'll see here that we're deploying the virtual appliance, and we're obviously using the power of video to sort of play this up at warp speed because this does take quite a bit of time. But you can see here the appliance has been deployed. We're going to open up the console of this virtual machine. It's booted, it's ready to go. And now we're going to hit its management interface in a web browser. And once we're in the web browser, we're going to log into this virtual appliance. And we're going to be met with a very similar experience that we were met with when we deployed the VxRail Manager. So we accept our end user license agreement. And we're going to be presented with a screen that prompts us to download a configuration parameter worksheet, which is essentially an Excel workbook that we're going to download. And we're going to use that Excel workbook, and we're going to fill out all of the properties that are required for us to complete the bring-up process for the management cluster. So you'll see here I'm actually uploading that Excel spreadsheet into the system, and it's going to start a validation flow. I'll show you what the spreadsheet looks like here in a second. But once we've actually started the validation flow, we're going to flip over to Excel, and you'll see what this spreadsheet looks like. You'll see that we can supply input parameters like usernames and passwords for all of my components, sizing for my virtual appliances, license keys for all the components, IP addresses and VLAN information, NSX information for my NSX managers, our edge clusters, our Geneva encapsulated VXLAN or virtual encapsulated segments, BGP peering information for the edge clusters to peer with our physical network. All of that information is captured one time in this Excel spreadsheet and then uploaded into the Cloud Builder appliance, and the VMware Cloud Foundation product does the rest for us. Okay, so you can see here, again, we're playing this forward at warp speed. We're going ahead and we're deploying all of the Cloud Foundation components. This process is 100% automated, and typically this takes about 3 to 4 hours for this to complete. So we're playing this back at very, very quick speed. But this does everything for us from all of the necessary vCenter configurations, creation of accounts, the deployment of NSX. So this actually will deploy the NSX managers for us. It will also deploy the edge clusters, including 2 edge nodes and all the BGP configuration between our virtual machine, our virtual network, and our physical network. You can see that's what it's just finishing up now. It performs integrations with the VxRail manager that we talked about in round 1. And when we're done, we're able to download this audit type artifact that basically shows us all the things that this process did in order to stand up the system. It's called the VMware Cloud Builder report. So this is a nice leave behind from the system so that we have full traceability of everything that was performed by the bring up process. Okay, so now that the process is done, we're going to go ahead and click finish here, and we're going to click this button that says Launch SDDC Manager. So when we launch SDDC Manager, this is the management pane. This is a virtual appliance that was deployed as part of this Cloud Foundation bring-up process. And the SDDC Manager, you can see we have a management workload domain, which is the cluster that we just deployed. You can see references to the hosts that are present that make up this management domain. Those are the same 4 hosts that were part of the VxRail process. And when we look at the vCenter instance, you can now see all the virtual machines that it actually applied. You can also see that the VxRail manager is now being managed by the Cloud Foundation SDDC manager. So what that means is there's a very, very tight integration between the software stack that sits on top of the hardware and the underlying hardware that is supporting that software stack, so that we can do full integrated lifecycle management of the Cloud Foundation components and the underlying VxRail hardware. So if we recap what we completed so far in rounds 1 and 2, we've successfully deployed a VxRail management cluster for all of our management functions in our software-defined data center. When we deployed the VMware Cloud Foundation bring-up process on top of the VxRail cluster, which includes all of the SDDC manager components like NSX, and we even integrated it with ACI. So we're off to a good start, 30% of the way transformed for CDI Swag. Let's move on to round 3. So in round 1, we deployed a VxRail management cluster to support our management functions. And in round 2, we built on that by deploying the VMware Cloud Foundation on top of it. Now it's time to provision what we call a ViWorkload Domain. So the ViWorkload Domain is a construct within VMware Cloud Foundation that allows us to deploy a compute, network, and storage cluster of resources to actually host our modern application. So in this particular case, we're going to be going through the process of deploying a new VxRail cluster that will be used to deploy Kubernetes on top so that we can go ahead and deploy our modern e-commerce platform to it. So you'll notice that we went through a wizard and we requested the creation of a new workload domain that we called NYC VCF WLD1. Now, what this workload process does, you can see that it's sort of spinning in this activating state. And what it's actually doing behind the covers is it's creating a new vCenter instance inside the management cluster that will be used to manage our new VxRail cluster in the workload domain. So you can see a list of all the things that it does here. And when we flip back to the vCenter console, you'll notice now that via enhanced link mode, we can see the management vCenter at the top of the screen. And what's highlighted now is the new workload domain 1 vCenter. Okay. So also as part of this process, we now have to attach our VxRail cluster to the new vCenter that was just deployed. So you'll see that we're going to drive through this wizard here where we supply information about our new VxRail cluster. We're not going to show you that process because it's exactly the same process that we went through in round 1 to deploy our management cluster. We just happen to do it again with a new 3-node cluster this time instead of 4 nodes like we did in the management cluster. We went through that process to create a 3-node cluster. And this is really the process to attach the new workload domain VxRail cluster to the VCF infrastructure. Now, in addition to that, what's also happening is SDDC Manager is orchestrating the creation of an additional NSX instance, which will reside inside of the workload domain, and will deploy also an NSX edge cluster to this workload domain, which will facilitate the north-south routing between the workload domain and the physical network. So you can see here that the wizard is just finishing up, just a couple more refreshes, and we should be able to look at the properties of our new workload domain. We'll see that it's completed in terms of its configuration, If we click into that, you'll now notice that we can see the NSX Manager that has been deployed as part of this new workload domain. We can look at the hosts that are there. We can inspect properties about the physical cluster, which is the VxRail cluster, and so on and so forth. So if we look at the NSX Manager, actually we're going to log into the vCenter here. We'll see the edge VMs that were deployed as part of the edge bring-up process. So this is the edge cluster that was deployed in NSX, which will host the distributed logical router, which is a T0 router. There's also a T1 router. And these are all the workings of NSX that allow us to perform software-defined networking functions. This will interface with Kubernetes. And the Tier 0 router that we're showing you now, this is the BGP configuration that gets automated as part of this process to peer with our top-of-rack Cisco ACI networking infrastructure. So you can see here, just in summary, you can now see that the edge cluster that we deployed is associated with this particular workload domain, and that completes the setup. Okay, so now it's time to talk about Kubernetes. We've met all of the requirements. We've deployed our workload domain. We've deployed all the prerequisites for Kubernetes, including NSX in this case, and we're going to go ahead and turn on what we call the workload management feature in vSphere 7. So for those who have been following this journey, a couple years ago, VMware announced something called Project Pacific, which has undergone some branding changes throughout the years, and it's now manifesting itself in the form of something that we call vSphere with Tanzu. So we're going through the vSphere with Tanzu bring-up process, which is really essentially we're defining all of the inputs that are required for Tanzu to function inside of the hypervisor. Okay, so we're defining management networks and cluster API networks. We're defining pod networking. We're defining ingress and egress ranges for networking. And all of this gets integrated with NSX and is all automatically configured once we supply these values. So once we finish the wizard here, we're going to click Next. We'll click Next again. And we're going to go ahead and add something called a content library. So the content library is essentially a repository where we can store images that will be used to create Kubernetes clusters on top of vSphere, which we're going to demo here in just a second. So if we click Finish, we're going to step through this process. You'll see that obviously we're speeding this up just because this does take a little while. But once we're done, you'll notice that our workload management feature, we'll see that our cluster has been successfully enabled for workload management, which essentially means that our ESX hosts are now participating as worker nodes in a Kubernetes cluster. You can see the supervisor control VMs. These are our master nodes in the Kubernetes cluster that are deployed as VMs. And the worker nodes are actually the Kubernetes, or actually the ESX servers themselves. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to enable what we call the Harbor image repository. So this is deployed as part of or as a vSphere native pod. So Harbor is turned on. We're just going to assign some storage policies and some administrative access for the Harbor instance. But essentially what happens here is you're going to see a new namespace created, which is what's highlighted there. And in a couple seconds, you're going to see these native pods get spun up inside of this namespace within vCenter. And those pods are actually native Kubernetes pods running directly on the ESX hypervisor. And that is what is serving up the Harbor instance for our private container registry. Okay, so you can see all the pods that are supporting Harbor there. And that completes the Harbor setup. We're going to go ahead and click on the link to log in to the Harbor instance. We supply our username and password. And now we're off and running. We can consume our private container registry. Okay. So we've set up the supervisor cluster, which is our Kubernetes cluster inside of vSphere. We've set up our private image repository. Now it's time to create what we call a namespace. So we're going to create a namespace here. You could think of a namespace as a logical boundary that allows developers access to a Kubernetes cluster with essentially, think of it like a sandbox almost, or a container to be able to deploy their application in. So we're going to create this namespace. And once we create the namespace, a bunch of things are happening behind the scenes, like the creation of virtual load balancer objects and T1 routers within NSX to facilitate networking for the namespace. And we're going to add permissions and we're going to add some storage policies so that the people who consume this namespace can store these objects on the vSAN storage within our VxRail cluster. So our namespace is configured. Now we're going to turn our attention to something called Tanzu Mission Control. So Tanzu Mission Control is a SaaS-based platform that allows us to have a cloud control plane for Kubernetes. So what you're seeing on the screen here is we're actually going to use the Tanzu Mission Control SaaS control plane to provision a Kubernetes guest cluster on top of our vSphere cluster in our data center. Okay, so the way we do that is we've essentially connected our supervisor cluster to the SaaS control plane, and Kubernetes, the Tanzu Mission Control uses something called Cluster API, which is an open source project that VMware contributes to that allows you to configure Kubernetes clusters essentially using Kubernetes, right? And so we've configured this new Kubernetes cluster on top of our vSphere infrastructure called TS3 vSphere cluster, okay? And in Tanzu Mission Control, I can see a dashboard of this cluster. I can see health metrics. I can see performance metrics and things like that. And what we're going to do now is we're actually going to use developer tools to log in to this new Kubernetes cluster that we just configured. So we're going to use native developer tools using kubectl commands. You can see there that we just did a kubectl get context, which is going to tell us what Kubernetes context we have access to. And then we're going to point our context at our new Kubernetes cluster. We're going to do a get nodes, and you can see that the nodes that are displayed in the kubectl command match the nodes or the names of the virtual machines that were just created. Okay, so now we're going to deploy some test services. So I'm just going to deploy a very standard Nginx container and expose that as a service. We'll go ahead and do a kubectl get services, and we'll grab the IP address of that service, and then we should be able to open up a web browser and actually pull up the default Nginx configuration, which will show you that our Kubernetes instance is functioning as expected, the networking is there to support it, and that completes round 3. So let's recap. Where are we to this point? So we're 60% of the way there on our digital transformation for the CDI Swag company, okay? So we've deployed a management infrastructure, we've deployed a workload infrastructure, we've deployed NSX to support networking for both of those, and we've deployed Kubernetes both inside of vSphere and on top of vSphere with SaaS-based management capabilities of both. Okay, we're almost there, round 4. So we've configured Kubernetes on-prem, and round 4 now, we're going to provision Kubernetes in a multi-cloud environment using infrastructure as code. So you can see here, this is the Tanzu Mission Control. You'll notice that we're in dark mode now because my buddy Joe Tortorelli is my developer friend who is going and driving this demo for us here. And what Joe's going to do is he's going to switch over to his Visual Studio Code editor, and he's going to execute a script that he wrote that is going to do a bunch of things here. So the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to leverage some Terraform to provision some Kubernetes clusters using the Azure Kubernetes Service, or AKS, as well as the Elastic Kubernetes Service, or EKS, in Amazon. Okay. So once it provisions those Kubernetes clusters, we're going to go ahead and deploy some test services to those, like Nginx and those types of things like we did in the last demo. And then we're going to actually register those clusters with Mission Control so that we can show you how we can do cross-cloud policy-based enforcement of Kubernetes policy for disparate Kubernetes clusters that are out there. So what you're seeing here on the screen are the Terraform files for both the EKS and the AKS clusters. So you can notice things like the types of regions that we're deploying to, the instance types, the number of instances that will be used ultimately to support those clusters. And you'll notice here the AWS console, we're in the Ohio region, nothing to see here yet at this point, right? It's just an empty vanilla instance because the script just started running, and you could expect the same in the Azure console as well, right? Nothing really to see. It's just a vanilla Azure instance. Okay, so we're going to speed this up, and as this is going, you'll notice things are starting to happen, right? Kubernetes clusters are getting established. We're going to start deploying some of those services. And if we flip back to our cloud consoles, as we start to refresh this, you'll see there is our EKS cluster. If we click into that EKS cluster, you're going to notice all the usual things that you would notice about an EKS cluster, right? You're going to see the hosts that are supporting it. If we click on eventually we'll click on the workload screen here, and you're going to notice the test workloads that we ran for each of these. So you can see Nginx, you can see Apache, you can see Core DNS, and some of the other things that we've deployed in there. If we click on configuration, this again is just normal configuration detail that you might expect when you create an EKS cluster in Amazon. And then similar on the Microsoft side of things, right? If we refresh this console, you're going to see, the typical things you might expect to see, like the instances that support this cluster, the networking constructs, the security constructs, those types of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip into mission control. And if you look at mission control, the first thing you're going to notice is we now have a vSphere-based Kubernetes cluster, an Amazon-based Kubernetes cluster, and an Azure Kubernetes cluster, all in one console. Pretty cool. So if we click into any one of these, we're going to start with the AWS one. You'll notice that this looks a lot like the one that we showed when we showed the vSphere cluster. I can look at nodes. I can look at namespaces. In fact, we're going to create a very important TechSummitIII namespace in our Amazon cluster. So Joe's going to go ahead and click on create a new namespace. He'll go ahead and click on create. And once he clicks on create, he's going to pull up his console using his normal developer tools. And he's going to switch his context to authenticate against that AWS cluster. He's going to issue a kube control get namespace command. And you'll see he'll highlight the namespace gets configured from mission control. So pretty cool. I can use mission control via a SaaS GUI-driven platform to go ahead and provision namespaces on my cluster. Same experience with Azure, right? I can see nodes, I can see namespaces, all the same feature sets are available across the various different platforms for management. Now, one of the things that is really, really cool about being able to do this is the ability to enforce policy across Kubernetes clusters in different clouds, right? And so what we're going to do here is we're pointing at one of our Kubernetes clusters and we're doing just a get role bindings command, right? And what we're going to do in mission control is we're going to create a new role binding policy, which is going to assign a new role binding for our clusters in the CDI demo cluster group, right? So we can group our clusters into cluster groups. That way we can assign policy to the group, and then all members of the group inherit that policy. So you'll notice now we refresh the command. Now we have our third cluster binding, or our role binding, and now we're going to switch context to the other cluster in the other cloud, and we're going to issue the same command, and you'll notice that it got the same exact role binding policy that the Amazon cluster did. So you can start to imagine now how powerful this is at scale, right? Kubernetes sprawl is a real thing when we talk to customers. Every single day we hear about how it was really easy to stand up Kubernetes and get it going and bootstrap a couple of clusters and launch a couple of applications. But when you get to tens and hundreds of Kubernetes clusters across different clouds and different instances, it becomes very difficult to manage. So this is certainly helpful. You can apply this for image policies to make sure that you're only allowing the right repositories. You can do networking policies, security policies. There's a lot of different things. We're really just scratching the surface in terms of the capabilities of mission control here, but we definitely wanted to showcase this as part of round 4. Okay, so let's recap round 4. So we leveraged infrastructure as code to deploy a multi-cloud Kubernetes solution using open source tools like Terraform to be able to provision AWS and Azure-based Kubernetes clusters. And we then imported those Kubernetes clusters for management purposes into our Tanzu Mission Control SaaS control plane. This is incredibly powerful at scale and certainly something that will be important for customers as they manage more and more Kubernetes infrastructure in their environment. Okay, so we're 80% of the way there. Just one more round to go. All right, let's begin our last round, round number 5. We're calling round 5 Developer Experience. So we've been talking a lot about infrastructure, and now it's time for us to talk about our application. So you can see here we have a demo application that we've deployed that is in all of its 80s video game glory. And you'll notice that we have an error page on our homepage. So it says you've been knocked out, indicating that there's some kind of problem. Okay, so you'll notice that our application source code is deployed in our GitLab source code repository. And our developer friend, Joe, is going to go ahead and open up his code editor. And he's going to make a magical commit, okay, to this application. Obviously, we're having a little bit of fun with this. So he's just going to touch a file called magic. He's going to commit this and merge it with the master branch in the GitLab repository. And what that's going to do is via a webhook integration with our CI system, that's going to configure a Jenkins job to execute, to perform a build of this application, and to redeploy it to our Kubernetes infrastructure. So you'll notice if we go ahead and click into the pipeline execution, we'll go ahead and look at the output of the console of that execution. And when we go back to our website, you'll notice that our Tech Summit website has been restored. Okay. Now, obviously, we're oversimplifying this. We're going to be doing a lot of events in the future that focus specifically more on the developer experience and how this interfaces with things like change management policies. And overall, we're going to be doing a lot more with observability and investigation systems to talk about more of the application side of this. But today, really, we were focusing more on the infrastructure. That said, we do have this demo application. You'll notice that this is a public URL. You can go ahead and visit this application. The URL is ts3.cdidemo.cloud, which is the URL that we have been using for the entire demo for today's event. And we would encourage all of you to go ahead and hit this URL in your browser right now. You can visit the site, put in your information. You'll notice we put in a little cheeky comment about how our credit card system is broken. Just put in your name, put in your address, and your preferred size of t-shirt, and we will definitely be mailing you a Tech Summit III t-shirt for attending today. Okay, so we made it through round 5, and we've successfully digitally transformed the CDI Swag company. We have deployed a modern infrastructure platform. We've deployed a modern multi-cloud Kubernetes platform and shown how you can use a SaaS control plane to manage Kubernetes clusters in your data center, in AWS and in Azure, and we've successfully deployed our Kubernetes-based application to that modern infrastructure. Don't forget, visit ts3.cdidemo.cloud. We will leave this up probably for about a day. Just fill out the form. We'll get all your information. Just make sure you put in a valid shipping address, and we will certainly ship you a CDITechSummitIII limited edition t-shirt. All right, so it's almost time. We're going to start our first breakout session starting at the top of the hour. We've got a couple minutes. Remember, if you aren't able to attend a specific session that you would want to, make sure you follow us on social channels so that you can watch the recordings of these events. I really hope that you enjoy the content for today. We're very grateful for your attendance, and we're looking forward to engaging each and every one of you in person, hopefully sometime very, very soon. Thank you again to our sponsors for being such a huge part of Tech Summit. We would not be able to do this without you. And again, we're looking forward to seeing everybody very soon. Take care. Thank you.